In the fading light of an autumn evening, Sarah and Samuel Wilson stood at the edge of a forgotten property, their 12-year-old frames dwarfed by the vastness of the overgrown land before them. The letter, clutched in Sarah's hand, had traveled across 3 states to reach the Blackburn home where they'd spent the past 18 months. It promised something they'd never truly had, a place to belong. Sarah adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses, a hand-me-down too large for her delicate face, and tucked a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear. Her journal, bound in faded blue fabric and bursting with pressed flowers and written observations, peeked from her patch backpack. Beside her, Samuel shifted his weight from one worn sneaker to another, his fingers instinctively reaching for the small pocket knife he carried, a gift from their father before the accident. "Do you think it's real?" Samuel whispered, his eyes fixed on the weathered 2-story farmhouse. "Our great-grandparents really left us this place." The wind whispered through tall grasses that had claimed what once were neat fields, carrying the scent of wild blackberries and pine. In the distance, an old barn stood defiant against time's passage, its red paint faded to the color of dried blood. "The lawyer said the taxes are paid through next year," Sarah replied, always the practical one. Mr. Harrison wouldn't lie about something like this. Behind them, Mrs. Blackburn's voice cut through the evening air. "Don't get your hopes up about this place. Probably falling apart inside. Not worth the trouble." She hadn't even bothered to turn off the car engine, the radio still playing softly, another clear message that this visit was an inconvenience. 5 years had passed since the accident that took their parents on a rain-slicked mountain road. 5 years of different homes, different rules, different disappointments. The Blackburns were neither cruel nor kind. They simply existed in the children's orbit, collecting their monthly check and providing the minimum requirements of shelter and sustenance. In those 5 years, the only constant had been Mrs. Rose Hanson, their elderly neighbor with arthritic hands that still somehow coaxed the most beautiful melodies from her antique piano. At 70, her silver hair always neatly pinned and her eyes bright with wisdom, she had become the closest thing to family the twins had. It was Mrs. Rose who had helped them decipher the lawyer's letter. Mrs. Rose who had insisted they visit the property. Mrs. Rose who had pressed warm cranberry muffins into their hands that morning and whispered, "Sometimes, dears, the universe has a way of bringing things full circle." Now as they approached the porch steps, time seemed to slow. Each creak of weathered wood beneath their feet echoed with possibility. The key, ancient and heavy in Sarah's palm, slid into the lock with surprising ease. "Whatever happens," Samuel said, his voice steadier than he felt, "we stick together." Sarah nodded, turning the key. "Always have." The door swung open to reveal the past, perfectly preserved in dust and silence. Have you ever received news that changed the course of your life in an instant? A letter, a phone call, or perhaps a chance encounter that opened doors you never knew existed? Share your moment of unexpected change in the comments below. Now let's continue with Sarah and Samuel's journey. 2 weeks later, a faded blue Buick rumbled down the country roads of Meadowbrook, Virginia, carrying Sarah, Samuel, and Mrs. Rose toward a new chapter. Autumn had painted the landscape in amber and crimson, the rolling hills and weathered fences telling stories of generations past. "It's like driving through one of those calendar pictures," Samuel said, his breath fogging the window as farms and fields rolled by. Mrs. Rose smiled, her gnarled hands steady on the steering wheel. "This is old America, children. The America your great-grandparents helped build." The Blackburns had raised surprisingly few objections to this weekend trip. "3 days," Mrs. Blackburn had said, not looking up from her television show. "Don't expect us to fix anything that breaks while you're playing house." As the car rounded the final bend, the Wilson property emerged from a curtain of maple trees. In daylight, the white farmhouse revealed its true character, weathered but proud, with a wide front porch and blue shutters hanging at odd angles. It looks like something from a storybook, Sarah whispered. Inside, time had stood remarkably still, sheets draped over furniture like sleeping ghosts. A grandfather clock, its pendulum long stilled, dominated the entryway. The hardwood floors creaked a welcome beneath their careful steps, releasing the scent of lemon oil and memories. The kitchen, with its 1950s mint green refrigerator and cast iron stove, told stories of family meals and midnight conversations. Sarah ran her fingers along the worn countertop, imagining her great-grandmother Eleanor rolling dough for apple pies. "Look at this," Samuel called from the living room. He had discovered a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf containing leather-bound classics, field guides to local flora and fauna, and decades-old National Geographic magazines. But it was the album Sarah found in the secretary desk that truly connected them to the past. Black and white photographs, carefully preserved beneath cellophane, showed a tall, bearded man with kind eyes standing beside a woman with an upswept hairdo and a determined smile. "Benjamin and Eleanor Wilson," Mrs. Rose confirmed, peering over Sarah's shoulder. "Your great-grandparents." As Sarah turned the brittle pages, the family story unfolded. Benjamin in his workshop, Eleanor in her garden, a young girl who must have been their grandmother Catherine playing beneath an ancient oak tree that still stood in the yard. Samuel, meanwhile, had wandered outside, drawn inexorably to the barn that loomed behind the house. Unlike the weathered farmhouse, the barn structure remained remarkably sound, its massive doors secured with an iron latch that yielded to his curious hands. The interior smelled of hay and old wood, dust motes dancing in shafts of light that penetrated through gaps in the walls. Workbenches lined one side, still bearing the tools of Benjamin Wilson's craft, planes and chisels, saws and hammers, arranged with careful precision. "Your great-grandfather was quite the craftsman," came a voice from the doorway, startling Samuel. A man in his mid-70s stood there, tall despite his slight stoop, wearing denim overalls and a flannel shirt despite the autumn warmth. A straw hat shaded eyes that examined Samuel with equal parts curiosity and recognition. "You must be Benjamin's kin," the man said. "Been a long time since a Wilson set foot on this property." Howard Davis had been Benjamin Wilson's closest friend for over 60 years. He arrived bearing a still-warm apple pie and stories that breathed life into the faded photographs Sarah had been studying. "Your great-grandfather wasn't just any woodworker," Howard explained as they gathered around the kitchen table. Mrs. Rose had found dishes in the cupboards, washing away decades of dust to serve pie on delicate blue china that had once belonged to Eleanor. He had a gift for understanding how things fit together, how wood and metal could combine to create objects both beautiful and intricate. "Rich folks from 3 states away commissioned his work," Howard continued, savoring a bite of pie. "But Benjamin saw craftsmanship as something sacred, a way to bring order to chaos." Sarah's journal lay open beside her plate, her neat handwriting capturing Howard's every word. Samuel, his pie half-eaten, kept glancing toward the barn, clearly eager to return to his exploration. "What happened to them?" Sarah asked. "Why did they leave everything behind?" Howard's expression clouded. "That's the mystery, isn't it? Summer of '89, they packed up overnight, left most everything behind." He tapped his fork against his plate, thinking. "Your grandmother Catherine had already moved away by then, married your grandfather, and moved to Ohio." "But why would they just abandon their home?" Mrs. Rose asked, refilling Howard's coffee cup from the percolator she'd somehow coaxed back to life. "That's what folks around here have wondered for 30 years, Howard replied. "Property taxes kept getting paid from some account, but the place just sat empty. Locals figured the Wilsons would come back eventually. After 10 years, folks stopped expecting it." After pie, Samuel convinced Sarah to join him in the barn. Mrs. Rose settled on the porch with Howard, their conversation a soft murmur carried away by the autumn breeze. In the barn's dusty interior, Samuel proudly showed his sister what he discovered: a walking stick, beautifully carved from dark wood, with the initials BW inlaid near the handle. "Great-grandfather Benjamin's," he said, running his fingers over the intricate leaf patterns that spiraled down its length. But Sarah's attention had shifted to the barn floor, where disturbed dust revealed recent footprints, much larger than Samuel's sneakers and with a distinctive tread pattern. "Someone's been here," she whispered, kneeling to examine the prints. "Recently." Before Samuel could respond, they heard the distinctive sound of tires on gravel. Howard's voice rose in warning from the porch, followed by Mrs. Rose's response, too distant to make out the words but urgent in tone. "Quick!" Samuel grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her behind a stack of hay bales. Through a gap, they watched as a tall man in an expensive charcoal suit entered the barn. His shoes, Italian leather with a distinctive sole pattern, matched the footprints they just discovered. "Abandoned for decades," the man muttered, moving with purpose toward the workbenches. "Yet someone's been disturbing things." From their hiding place, the twins watched as he methodically examined the space, his gloved hands opening drawers and testing floorboards. When he reached the center of the barn, he knelt, brushing away accumulated hay and debris to reveal something that made Sarah stifle a gasp. Wooden planks laid in a pattern distinct from the earthen floor elsewhere, concealing what appeared to be a trap door. A shadow darkened the barn entrance. Howard stood there, his frame suddenly imposing despite his age. "Property's been empty near 30 years, he called, causing the stranger to straighten abruptly. "Now twice in a week, I find folks poking around. Might I ask your business here, Mr. Reynolds?" The man Reynolds adjusted his tie with practiced nonchalance. "Mr. Davis, I didn't expect to see you today." "Clearly," Howard replied dryly. "I represent Northland Antiquities," Reynolds said, producing a business card. "We're researching items of historical significance that may have been commissioned by Russian émigrés in this region during the 1980s. "The Wilsons kept to themselves," Howard replied. "Don't recall any Russians." Reynolds smiled thinly. "Perhaps your memory fails you, Mr. Davis. Or perhaps Benjamin Wilson kept certain commissions. Confidential." He stepped closer to Howard, his voice dropping. "Old debts have a way of coming due, even after all these years. I'd hate to see the Wilson children drawn into something they don't understand." With that veiled threat hanging in the air, Reynolds departed, his expensive car kicking up gravel as it accelerated down the long driveway. From their hiding place, Sarah and Samuel exchanged wide-eyed looks. The autumn adventure had suddenly become something far more mysterious and potentially dangerous. Howard's cottage stood a quarter-mile from the Wilson property, nestled among ancient oak trees that shielded it from both summer sun and winter wind. Inside, time moved differently, measured by the steady tick of a grandfather clock and the comforting rhythm of Howard's rocking chair. "Been here 62 years, he told the twins as he settled them with mugs of hot chocolate topped with tiny marshmallows that melted into sweet clouds. "Moved in after the Army, same time Benjamin and Eleanor bought their place." The living room walls told Howard's life story, photographs of his younger self with Benjamin fishing at the creek that bordered both properties, Howard in uniform during the Korean War, a wedding portrait with a smiling woman in a 1950s lace dress. "That's Martha," Howard said, following Sarah's gaze to the portrait. "Lost her to cancer in '92. She taught third grade for 37 years at Meadowbrook Elementary." On a corner table, a collection of carved wooden animals, a bear, a fox, an owl with intricate feathers, caught Samuel's attention. "Benjamin made those," Howard said. "Anniversary gifts for Martha, one each year. Said the carved animals would keep her company when I was away on fishing trips." While Mrs. Rose helped Howard prepare a simple dinner of vegetable soup and cornbread, Sarah and Samuel spread the old photo album on a quilted bedspread in the guest room they would share. "Something happened back in 1989, Sarah whispered, pointing to where the photographs abruptly ended. something that made them leave everything behind. And that Reynolds guy knows something about it, Samuel added. Did you see how he was looking for that trap door? He knew it was there. Sarah nodded, her mind racing. Howard knows more than he's telling us, too. Did you notice how he changed the subject when Mrs. Rose asked about Russians? After dinner, while the adults reminisced on the porch, Samuel slipped away into the twilight. Sarah found him 20 minutes later, balanced precariously on a branch of the massive oak tree that dominated Howard's front yard. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "Get down before you break your neck." But Samuel's triumphant grin stopped her scolding. In his hand, he held an intricately carved wooden birdhouse, weathered by decades of seasons, but still intact. And inside, nestled where birds had once made their home, gleamed a key, old-fashioned and heavy, its teeth complex and unfamiliar. "I saw it from Howard's window," he explained as he climbed down. "Remembered great-grandfather Benjamin made birdhouses, too." Later that night, as Howard showed them faded photographs of Benjamin's workshop beneath the barn, Sarah carefully raised the question that had been burning since their encounter with Reynolds. "Mr. Davis, what was great-grandfather protecting in his workshop? What would make someone search for it after all these years?" Howard's weathered face grew solemn. The clock ticked 5 times before he answered. "Your great-grandmother Eleanor wasn't just Benjamin's wife," he said finally. "She was his strength, his protector too, in ways folks around here never fully understood. Benjamin was the craftsman, but Eleanor," he smiled softly, "Eleanor was the keeper of secrets." Family heirlooms always carry their own stories. Do you have an item passed down from previous generations? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Now let's return to Sarah and Samuel's discovery. The next morning dawned cool and misty, transforming the Wilson property into something ethereal. Sarah stood on the front porch, her journal open, capturing the way sunlight filtered through fog and turned the dew-covered spider webs into diamond necklaces draped across the overgrown garden. Inside, Mrs. Rose and Howard discussed practical matters: the condition of the roof, the ancient furnace in the basement, the paperwork needed to secure the children's inheritance. Samuel had disappeared upstairs, drawn by the unexplored bedrooms of the second floor. "Sarah!" His excited call echoed down the stairwell. "Come see what I found." In the smallest bedroom at the end of the hall, a space with faded pink wallpaper peeling at the seams, Samuel knelt beside a narrow iron bed frame stripped of its mattress. The wooden floor beneath had caught his attention, boards of a slightly different color than those in the rest of the room. "They don't match," Sarah observed, kneeling beside him. "And look, no nails." Together they lifted the loose floorboards, revealing a small compartment. Inside lay a single object, wrapped in what had once been a white handkerchief, now gray with dust and age. Sarah lifted it carefully, heavier than expected, with a satisfying solidity. Unwrapping it revealed a wooden box about the size of a thick hardcover book. Its surface was adorned with intricate inlaid patterns of different woods, forming a landscape of mountains and trees, the craftsmanship exquisite. "A music box," she breathed, recognizing the brass crank along its edge, tarnished green with age. With gentle fingers, Sarah turned it slowly, feeling the resistance of mechanisms long unused. For a moment, she feared it was broken beyond repair. Then came a click, and the crank began to turn more easily. As the first notes emerged, halting at first, then smoother as the mechanisms warmed to their purpose, Samuel's eyes widened in recognition. "That's Claire de Lune," he whispered. "Mrs. Rose plays it sometimes." "Mom used to hum it," Sarah added softly, her throat tightening with unexpected emotion, "when she thought we were asleep." The melody filled the small room, connecting them to their past, to the mother who had sung them to sleep, to the great-grandparents who had treasured this delicate instrument. As the last notes faded, Sarah examined the box more closely. The craftsmanship was exquisite, with dovetailed corners and a hinged lid that opened to reveal a velvet-lined interior. A tiny ballerina figurine, frozen mid-pirouette, stood on a small platform. "Look at the carvings," Samuel pointed out, running his finger along the edge. "They match the walking stick we found. The same leaves and mountains." Sarah pressed gently on different parts of the inlay, testing for hidden catches. When her finger caught on a nearly invisible seam along one side, she noticed that one section of the inlay pattern, a small pine tree, was slightly different in color from the surrounding wood. On impulse, she pressed it while the music played. A soft click, and a panel on the opposite side of the box slid open half an inch. Hardly daring to breathe, Sarah eased the panel fully open to reveal a tiny compartment. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded blue velvet, lay a key smaller and more ornate than the one from the birdhouse, its pattern of teeth complex and unusual. Beneath it was a yellowed photograph of a young woman holding an infant, with a handwritten note on the back. "Catherine with Elizabeth, 1960. Blood will find blood." "That's Grandma Catherine," Sarah whispered, "holding Mom." Samuel turned the music box over in his hands, examining it in the strengthening morning light that streamed through the bedroom window. As he tilted it, a pattern appeared on the underside, visible only when the light struck at precisely the right angle. "Sarah, look at this!" There, revealed in what must have been invisible ink that had aged into faint sepia, was a message in elegant handwriting. "What Vladimir entrusted to us is more than gold or jewels. It is history itself, preserved through revolution and exile. Benjamin's craft and my vigilance will keep it safe until the world is ready for its return." They brought their discoveries to Mrs. Rose and Howard, who sat at the kitchen table, expressions solemn as they examined the music box, keys, and hidden message. "Vladimir Petrov," Howard sighed, the name clearly familiar to him. "I wondered if this day would come." "You knew him?" Sarah asked, her pen poised over her journal. Howard nodded slowly. "Russian émigré. Came to the States after World War II. Aristocratic family that lost everything in the Revolution. He commissioned several pieces from Benjamin in the 80s, claimed they were the only ones with quality matching the old world craftsmen." "But there was more to it than craftsmanship, wasn't there?" Mrs. Rose asked quietly. Howard studied her face for a long moment. "You know something about this, don't you, Rose?" Instead of answering, Mrs. Rose gently took the music box, her arthritic fingers moving with surprising dexterity across its surface. "Debussy," she murmured as she wound the crank again. "Clair de Lune. My father loved this piece." The melody filled the kitchen once more, sunlight streaming through windows that Sarah had cleaned that morning, casting rainbow prisms through the crystal sugar bowl that Eleanor Wilson had once filled for family breakfast. "Sarah, Samuel," Mrs. Rose said when the music ended, "there's something I should have told you earlier. My maiden name wasn't Hansen, it was Petrov." The silence that followed held the weight of decades. "Vladimir Petrov was my uncle," she continued, her steady gaze moving between the twins. "He entrusted your great-grandfather with something of immense historical and cultural value, something that rightfully belonged to the Russian people, but which would have been destroyed during the revolution had my grandfather not smuggled it out." Before she could explain further, the crunch of tires on gravel silenced them all. Howard moved swiftly to the window. "Reynolds," he confirmed grimly, "and he's not alone." Samuel gathered their discoveries, quickly returning the music box and keys to Sarah's backpack. Through the kitchen window, they watched as Michael Reynolds emerged from a black sedan, accompanied by an older man with silver hair and a bearing that suggested military training despite his expensive suit. "Victor Reynolds," Mrs. Rose whispered, recognition and something like fear in her voice. "Michael's father. Howard's hand closed around the walking stick he'd carried since the Korean War. "Rose, take the children out the back way. Go to the barn. You remember the creek entrance?" She nodded, already gathering her purse. "What's happening?" Sarah asked, alarm rising in her throat. "The Reynolds family has been searching for the Petrov treasure for 3 generations," Mrs. Rose explained, her voice low and urgent. "They were on the wrong side of history during the Revolution, and they've never forgiven those who escaped with the imperial treasures." As they slipped out the back door, Samuel paused, ear pressed to the wall, listening to the conversation that began in Howard's living room. "We know the Wilson twins have been here, Davis," came a cultured voice with the faintest trace of an accent. "And we know about the workshop beneath the barn. After 30 years, the game is over." Howard's reply was too low to hear, but the threat in Victor Reynolds' next words was unmistakable. "Those children have no idea what they have inherited or the dangers that come with it." Hurrying to catch up with Sarah and Mrs. Rose, Samuel felt the weight of the walking stick in his hand, the keys and music box in his sister's backpack, and the growing certainty that their autumn adventure had become something far more significant than they could have imagined. Back at the Wilson farm, they moved swiftly toward the barn, Mrs. Rose with surprising agility despite her 70 years. The trapdoor that Reynolds had discovered yesterday remained partially exposed, its elaborate lock mechanism now making more sense. "2 keys," Sarah said, remembering the journal's words. "2 keys used in a specific sequence." "And the music," Mrs. Rose added. "The melody is part of the mechanism." Kneeling beside the trap door, Sarah examined both keys in the dusty light streaming through the barn walls. The first, found in the birdhouse, was larger, cruder, its teeth a relatively simple pattern. The second, from the music box, was smaller, more delicate, with an intricate arrangement that seemed impossibly fine for a functional key. As Mrs. Rose wound the music box, Sarah inserted the larger key into the more visible keyhole, turning it in rhythm with the music's pattern. First right, then left, then right again, further than before. Something clicked inside the mechanism and a plate shifted, revealing the second keyhole. The ornate key turned almost 2 full rotations before catching with a solid thunk. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a series of mechanical clicks, like falling dominoes, the entire lock mechanism began to move. The heavy trap door rose half an inch, lifted by some hidden counterweight system. Samuel grasped the edge and pulled. The door rose smoothly, revealing a set of wooden stairs descending into darkness. The stale air that rose from the opening carried scents of wood, metal, and something else they couldn't identify. An old, dry smell, unlike anything they'd encountered before. "Quickly," Mrs. Rose urged, already placing her foot on the first step. "They won't be far behind." The stairs descended into what seemed like another world, Benjamin Wilson's secret workshop, perfectly preserved for over 30 years. Battery-powered LEDs embedded in the walls activated as they descended, responding to some mechanism triggered by the music box's melody. The space was larger than Sarah had expected, perhaps 20 feet square, with workbenches lining the walls and a large table dominating the center. Unlike the barn above, which had suffered from decades of neglect, this underground sanctuary remained remarkably intact. Tools arranged meticulously on pegboards, jars of hardware organized by size and type, notebooks stacked neatly on shelves. "It's exactly as he left it," Mrs. Rose whispered, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Benjamin was always so orderly." On the central table lay what appeared to be a project in progress. A wooden case approximately 2 feet long, its lid secured with another of Benjamin Wilson's mechanical locks. Beside it sat a leather-bound journal, a magnifying glass, and several specialized tools Sarah didn't recognize. While Samuel explored the workbenches, examining the precision instruments with reverent hands, Sarah opened the journal, discovering page after page of detailed notes and sketches written in her great-grandfather's precise hand. Most entries documented custom furniture pieces and their progress, but in March 1989, the tone changed dramatically. Entries became more cryptic, often using only initials or code words. "V's request proceeding," read one entry, "mechanism more complex than initially assessed, requires micro-adjustment of internal components." Later entries mentioned the Egg Project and included technical sketches of an oval object with intricate internal mechanisms. Mrs. Rose, meanwhile, had opened cabinets along the far wall, revealing specialized tools for working with precious metals and gemstones, far beyond the scope of ordinary woodworking. Benjamin expanded his skills for this project, she explained, learned metalsmithing and jewelry techniques. Sarah's attention was drawn to a small safe behind a sliding panel, which opened to the same ornate key that had unlocked the workshop door. Inside, they found additional documentation: letters from Vladimir Petrov discussing the restoration, insurance papers valuing the item at an astronomical sum, and a sealed envelope addressed "to my heir." As Sarah carefully opened this last item, Samuel's head suddenly jerked up. "Did you hear that?" From above came the unmistakable sound of the barn door opening. "Reynolds?" Mrs. Rose whispered, her face paling. "They must have followed us." Samuel moved swiftly to a cabinet, pulling out a drawer that clattered loudly to the floor, tools spilling across the concrete. "Samuel!" Sarah hissed, but he was already moving to the workbench, gathering the fallen tools into his arms. "The Eastern Tunnel," he said, nodding toward a narrow doorway they hadn't yet explored. "Howard mentioned it, said it leads to the creek." Before they could move, footsteps sounded on the stairs. Reynolds had found the open trap door and was descending. They pressed themselves against the wall beside the stairs, hardly daring to breathe. Michael Reynolds appeared first, his polished shoes incongruous in the dusty workshop. He surveyed the space briefly before speaking into a cell phone. "I'm in. The workshop exists, just as we thought." He paused, listening. "No sign of the egg yet, but they've been here, recently. There's a drawing of it in one of the journals." Another pause. "No, I'll continue searching. They can't have gone far." Unexpectedly, his phone chimed loudly with an incoming call, startling him. As he fumbled with the device, Samuel seized the opportunity, hurling a handful of small machine parts across the room. They clattered noisily against the far wall. Reynolds spun toward the sound, his back now to their hiding place. "Who's there?" In that moment of distraction, Mrs. Rose motioned urgently toward the Eastern Tunnel. Sarah grabbed the wooden case from the central table, along with the journal and documents, and they slipped silently into the narrow passage. Behind them, they heard Reynolds speaking again. "Someone's been here very recently. The dust is disturbed." A pause. "Yes, I'm checking the tunnels now. Father's bringing Mitchell. He can crack any lock." The Eastern Tunnel was narrower than the main passage, its ceiling lower, forcing even 12-year-old Samuel to duck at certain points. Sarah clutched the wooden case containing what must be the mysterious egg, its weight growing more burdensome with each step. After what seemed an eternity, but was perhaps only minutes, they reached a rough wooden door set into the earthen wall. A carved fish, the marker mentioned in Benjamin's notes, adorned its surface. The door opened to reveal a narrow opening, partially concealed by tree roots and brush. They emerged beneath a massive willow that had stood sentinel by the creek for over a century, its curtain of branches providing perfect cover. "The road is that way," Mrs. Rose pointed, her breath coming in short gasps. "If we hurry, we can reach Howard's neighbor's place. Edith Jenkins will help us." As they began to move, Sarah froze at the sound of a twig snapping nearby. Turning slowly, she found herself staring into familiar eyes. Not the cold gaze of Reynolds, but the warm brown eyes of Mrs. Rose's ancient Buick. and behind the wheel sat Howard Davis, a triumphant smile crossing his weathered face. "Thought you might need a quick exit," he said, rolling down the window. "Gave the Reynolds men some misinformation that should keep them busy for a while." Unexpected discoveries can change how we see our loved ones. Have you ever had a moment when you realized something special about a family member that you hadn't known before? Share your story in the comments. Now, let's return to our final chapter. Segment 8, Legacy and Choices. Professor Margaret Ellis's living room looked like a museum curator's dream, and nightmare had collided. Priceless artifacts sharing space with stacks of academic journals and half-empty teacups. At 65, the world's foremost expert on Russian imperial art wore her silver hair in a practical bob and peered at the wooden case through tortoiseshell glasses. "May I?" she asked, gloved hands hovering above the intricate locking mechanism. Sarah nodded, placing the music box beside it. They had driven 2 hours to reach the professor's home in Richmond, following Mrs. Rose's suggestion. Dr. James Chen from the Smithsonian had joined them, arriving breathless with excitement after Mrs. Rose's cryptic phone call. "If this is what I think it is," Dr. Chen said, adjusting his camera, "we're about to witness a moment of significant historical importance." Mrs. Rose demonstrated how the music box nestled perfectly into an indentation on the wooden case. When the crank was turned and Clair de Lune played, panels on the sides of the box slid open, revealing intricate gears that began to move in synchronized patterns. The lid rose slowly on hidden hinges. Inside, nestled on dark blue velvet, lay an oval object approximately 6 inches high. A collective gasp filled the room. The egg stood upright on a gold base, its surface a shimmering pale blue enamel overlaid with a lattice of platinum and diamonds. Tiny pearls dotted the intersections, and at the very top perched a delicate diamond star. Around its widest part ran a band of larger diamonds interspersed with sapphires. "The imperial lily egg," Professor Ellis whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Created circa 1898 for Tsarina Alexandra Feodorovna. Believed lost during the revolution?" Sarah gently pressed a small gold button, nearly hidden among the decorations. The upper half of the egg opened like a flower blooming, revealing the surprise within. A perfect miniature lily sculpted in white gold and platinum, its petals set with tiny diamonds, rising from a base of rock, crystal carved to resemble water. "This egg commemorated the birth of Grand Duchess Maria," Dr. Chen explained, carefully photographing the treasure from every angle. "The lily was a symbol of purity in the Russian imperial family." While the experts examined the egg, Sarah and Samuel pored over the documents they'd found. The certificate of provenance, letters from Vladimir Petrov, and the sealed letter from their great-grandfather. Vladimir Petrov entrusted this egg to Benjamin for restoration in 1989, Sarah summarized. It had been damaged during its secret journey out of Russia decades earlier. But before Petrov could reclaim it, he died suddenly in Switzerland, Samuel continued, reading from Benjamin's letter. Ownership transferred to great-grandfather, who accepted the responsibility but soon faced threats from people who had traced the egg to him. "The Reynolds family," Mrs. Rose confirmed grimly. "Victor's father worked for Soviet intelligence during the Cold War. They've been tracking lost imperial treasures for generations, not for their historical value, but for the prestige and wealth they represent." Howard, who had been standing silently by the window, suddenly straightened. "Car coming up the drive. Black sedan." Professor Ellis moved with surprising speed for her age, gathering the egg and documentation. "To my study," she directed, leading them through a hallway lined with Russian icons and imperial porcelain. They had barely secured the egg in Professor Ellis's concealed safe when the doorbell rang, followed by insistent knocking. Dr. Chen opened the door to find Victor Reynolds standing on the porch, flanked by two local police officers and a thin man carrying what appeared to be a locksmith's case. "Good afternoon, officers," Dr. Chen said pleasantly. "How may we help you?" "We're investigating a report of stolen property," one officer explained, looking uncomfortable. "Mr. Reynolds here claims that children have taken a family heirloom from an abandoned property." "The Wilson twins," Reynolds said smoothly, his accent more pronounced now. "They've taken a family artifact that rightfully belongs to the Petrov estate, which I represent." "Do you have documentation proving this ownership?" Professor Ellis asked, joining them at the door. Reynolds smiled thinly. "Of course. The egg was commissioned by the imperial family from House of Fabergé for my great-grandfather's service to the Tsar. After the revolution, it was illegally removed from Russia. I have spent my life tracking down my family's rightful heritage." From the doorway to the study, Mrs. Rose stepped forward, her diminutive frame somehow commanding. "That's a fascinating story, Victor," she said, her voice steady. "Especially since your grandfather was Mikhail Reynoldsky, who changed his name after coming to America in 1950. A man who served not the Tsar, but the Bolsheviks who overthrew him." Reynolds' composed expression faltered. "I am Rose Petrov Hansen," she continued. "Vladimir Petrov was my uncle. He entrusted the egg to Benjamin Wilson, not just for restoration, but for safekeeping from people like you." The standoff might have continued indefinitely if not for the arrival of a sleek government car. The woman who emerged wore a tailored suit and carried a leather portfolio bearing the seal of the State Department. "Special Agent Catherine Morris," she introduced herself, displaying credentials that made the local officers straighten. "Cultural Property Division. I understand there's a dispute regarding a potentially significant historical artifact?" What followed was a meticulous examination of documents: the provenance certificate Vladimir had provided, the transfer of ownership papers when he died, insurance records, and correspondence that clearly established the Wilson family's legal claim. "These appear to be in order," Agent Morris confirmed. "Furthermore, Mr. Reynolds, our office has been monitoring your activities for some time. Your company, Northland Antiquities, has been linked to several questionable acquisitions of cultural property." Reynolds' face hardened. "This isn't over," he said quietly, his gaze fixed on the twins. "Some debts can never be fully paid." As he turned to leave, Samuel called after him, "Mr. Reynolds?" The man paused, looking back with cold eyes. "Great-grandfather Benjamin wrote that what's worth protecting is worth protecting well," Samuel said, his young voice steady. "But he also believed that beauty and history belong to everyone, not just those powerful enough to claim them." In the silence that followed, something shifted, imperceptibly at first, then with growing clarity. The long shadow of the past, which had forced the Wilson family to abandon their home decades ago, began to recede in the warm light of the present. 6 months later, the legal proceedings against Victor Reynolds had concluded with a plea agreement, 5 years of probation, and the surrender of several other illegally obtained artifacts. His son Michael had turned state's evidence, revealing his father's network of black market antiquities dealers. The Reynolds name, once synonymous with wealth and influence in certain circles, now appeared in museum exhibitions as a cautionary tale of greed and exploitation. Meanwhile, the Wilson farmhouse stood transformed. Its white clapboards gleamed with new paint, blue shutters hung straight and true, and flower beds once again defined the walkways Eleanor had lovingly designed. The courts had approved Mrs. Rose as the twins' legal guardian, with Howard serving as a co-guardian to ensure the children could remain connected to their newly discovered roots. The Blackburns had signed away their foster parent rights with suspicious haste once they realized the twins had inherited property, clearly fearing scrutiny of their neglectful care. Their monthly checks now redirected to a trust fund for the children's education. Inside the restored farmhouse, Sarah sat at the secretary desk, her journal open before her. Through the window, she could see Samuel on the front lawn, carefully carving a small wooden figure under Howard's watchful guidance. Mrs. Rose played Claire de Lune on the antique piano they discovered in the parlor and painstakingly restored. The imperial lily egg now resided primarily at the Smithsonian, part of a special exhibition on lost treasures of the Russian Empire. A placard prominently credited Benjamin Wilson's craftsmanship in restoring the piece, alongside the remarkable story of how it came to be hidden in a rural Virginia barn for decades. The loan agreement, structured by attorneys provided pro bono by the museum, ensured that the egg would return to Meadowbrook for 1 month each year, to be displayed in a purpose-built secure gallery in the town's renovated library building. The barn had been transformed into the Benjamin Wilson School of Craftsmanship, where local youth and seniors learned traditional woodworking techniques that might otherwise be lost to time. The underground workshop remained preserved as Benjamin had left it, though the tunnel entrances were now properly secured with modern systems. The story of the Imperial Lily Egg had brought unexpected attention to Meadowbrook. Where once storefronts had stood empty, new businesses now thrived. A cafe, a bookshop, and artisan studios drawing tourists and history enthusiasts alike. The sleepy town had found new life, just as the Wilson twins had found their home. As twilight softened the spring landscape, Sarah joined her brother and their newfound family on the porch. Howard and Mrs. Rose exchanged glances that held decades of unspoken understanding. "What are you thinking about?" Mrs. Rose asked, noticing Sarah's thoughtful expression. Sarah looked around at the restored farmhouse, the children learning crafts in the barn, the townspeople strolling past and waving with newfound community pride. In her lap lay the music box, its melody a thread connecting past and present, pain and healing, loss and discovery. "I was thinking," she said, a smile spreading across her face, "that I finally understand what great-grandfather Benjamin meant about legacy being measured not in possessions but in character." Samuel nodded, running his fingers over the walking stick he'd found that first day. The tangible connection to a great-grandfather he'd never met, but whose craftsmanship and principles had changed their lives. "Blood will find blood," he quoted softly. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Mrs. Rose began to play again, the gentle notes of Claire de Lune floating across the porch, across the years, across the generations. A melody of healing, of coming home, of family found at last.